Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September 9th Lebanon City Council meeting. Our first order of business will be the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, move on to the roll call members. Madam Clerk, the roll, please.
Mike Kincaid.
Present.
Keith Campbell.
Here.
Sandra Jasonowski.
Present.
Dick Robertson.
Here.
John Copeland.
Here.
Sierra's messenger, she's absent this evening, and Robert Hawkins.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll have the minutes in our next meeting. So first up will be old business. First up in old business is Resolution 2024-17, fiscal plan for the Tadler LLC annexation. Ben?
Good evening, council members. As is customary with all annexations to the city, we are required to put together a fiscal plan associated with that. And so as with all fiscal plans, I will start in the appendices for that plan. And just as a quick reminder, the Tadler LLC property is out on the east side of town. It's next to Waterford on 100 South. I'll go through that here in a second when we get to the actual annexation ordinance. But this is a voluntary annexation. It's currently an agricultural property. While there is not a development plan proposed right now for the site, we do anticipate it'll be absorbed into the Waterford PUD at some time in the future. So right now there is no development proposed for this property. So the fiscal plan is fairly straightforward. If they want to bring the computer screen up for me here. Okay, so this is assessed, the estimated assessed value and tax rate impacts to the city. See here, this first column with the 1 is the estimated net assessed value of the annexation area. And if you'll recall, agricultural property is municipal tax exempt, and that's what MTE stands for. So unless or until there is a change in the use of the property, they would not pay any of the municipal taxes, so it is tax exempt. To see there then, that has no impact on the overall assessed value of the city or the tax levy and or the property tax rate. So unless or until there is a use or development on this property, there's no changes in the revenue and or property tax rates for the city. What you see here is what is already kind of programmed in estimates for city in the future. In terms of the costs, again, there are no uses proposed. There's no significant costs associated with annexing this piece of property. However, because there is a segment of 100 South that will be part of the annexation, two departments that do see some incremental increases in costs are the street department and the police department. So we apply a standard calculation for material supplies and repairs for the street department based on the mileage of street that's added. And so you can see here that for 2025, they've estimated about $1,000 in increased material supplies and repair costs. And that increases each year thereafter. And then for the police departments, primarily fuel and repairs to the vehicles for patrolling this area. And again, there's a factor that's applied to the mileage of street. And that would be $300 in 2025, accelerating or increasing from there. So for the totals, you got $1,300 in 2025, rising to $1,421 in 2028. And again, as I mentioned, at the bottom here is the net impact. As I mentioned, there is no assessed value because it's municipally tax exempt. So you see the estimated levy increase and or CCD levy increase. Those are shown as 0 because they would be municipally tax exempt. So then you see the additional costs. So you see the net impact as a cost to the city about $1,300 to $1,400 from 2025 to 2028. Keep in mind, however, that we do expect this property will develop at some point in the future as part of the Waterford development. So while there is no positive impact shown in this chart, we do expect there will be development later that will have assessed value and taxes paid to the city. So this is a quick summary based on existing conditions on the property at the time of annexation of the impact on the city. It's between $1,300 and $1,400 from 2025 to 2028. So that is the quick summary of the fiscal impact to the city. I'd be happy to answer any questions about this resolution.
So Ben, remind me, how many acres is this property?
I think it's roughly 80 acres.
Okay, and so for about $1,300, let's assume 1% tax rate, which we don't have, right?
Right.
We're lower than that, but make the math easy. So $1,300 would essentially be, call it $130,000 house, right? So if one $130,000 house is built on this property, we then become in the black in this property?
Right.
Is that, I mean, rough numbers, obviously,
Yeah.
but.
And so just for comparison's sakes, the actual assessed value of the property as agricultural ground is a little over $170,000.
Just as
So
ag
if it
land.
wasn't tax exempt, it'd already pay for itself.
Just wanted to clarify that, like, if we built like 2 houses,
Yeah,
it would be,
$1,300 is not enough is not that much in the grand scheme.
and I think they probably build more than 2 houses on 80
I would
acres.
expect that you're probably looking about 2.5 units per acre. So
Fair enough. Questions on that, Ben, before I have Rob read the resolution from council?
No, sir.
Okay, Rob?
Thank you, Mayor. Council Resolution 2024-17 is a resolution establishing the fiscal plan for the annexation of certain territory into the city. Whereas areas to be annexed are described in Exhibits A and B. Pursuant to Indiana law, this council is required to adopt a written fiscal plan prior to the passage of the annexation ordinance 2024-12. The fiscal plan, which is included as Exhibit C and attached here to, has been prepared and presented to this council for consideration. Whereas the fiscal plan has been reviewed and complies with the requirements of Indiana law, and this council hereby approves the fiscal plan for the areas sought to be annexed.
Okay, thank you, Rob. Resolution's been read. Any further comment, questions for council? Any public comment concerning resolution 2024-17? Okay. And motion from council.
Make a motion to approve resolution 2024-17.
Motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Second from John. All fair say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That resolution is adopted. All right, next up, we ordinance 2024-12. The council to consider annexation of Tadler LLC property is at 2301 East, 100 South. Ben.
thank you, Mayor. Just a quick recap. This is a 100% voluntary annexation that's been submitted by the property owner. As I mentioned, it's about 80 acres and is intended to be, it's under contract with Henke Development and will be absorbed into the Waterford Development. That will likely, you'll probably see that in a few months here when they amend the PUD ordinance to include this property. So it is intended this will be part of a development, but you can see here the location. Interstate 65 is just to the southwest here. 100 South is on the northern property line of this property, so it's about a mile or so east of the interstate. Fairgrounds are also just off the map here to the west. So that's a quick recap. This will, assuming that the annexation ordinance is adopted tonight, the annexation will be effective after a 30-day wait period. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions on Ben on this ordinance?
No, sir.
Rob?
Thank you, Mayor, Council. Second reading ordinance 2024-12 is, again, 100% of the owners of the parcels proposed for annexations identified in Exhibits A and B have filed a voluntary petition with this council pursuant to Indiana law. The Lebanon Advisory Plan Commission held a public hearing at its meeting on August 19th, 2024, and forwarded docket 24-26 to this council with a favorable recommendation 6-0 to assign residential R1 zoning classification for the annexation area. This council conducted a public hearing on August 26, 2024. This council just adopted a fiscal plan for the annexation of the annexation area. The annexation area meets the contiguity requirements required by Indiana law, and therefore be it resolved, this council finds that the annexation area that's generally located east 100 South, approximately 1 mile east of I-65 and adjacent to the existing corporate limits along the western, southern, and eastern boundaries of the annexation area, is declared annexed to and declared to be a part of the city of Lebanon. The annexation area is further to include the contiguous public highways and right-of-ways, which are adjacent to the annexation area. The annexation area is assigned Council District 2. And it's further, again, assigned residential R1 zoning classification and shall be in full force and effects in accordance with Indiana law.
Thank you, Rob. Any questions after the ordinance has been read for council?
No, sir.
Okay, would entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion we approve ordinance 2024-12.
No, second.
We have a motion to approve in a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That ordinance is approved. Thank you, council. All right, next up is ordinance 2024-13. Council consider amended PUD ordinance for Hickory Junction. This is on second reading.
Thank you, Mayor. Give you a quick recap of our conversation from last time, the Hickory Junction PUD ordinance. This is an amendment to that PUD ordinance that was adopted a couple years ago. Carton Associates, in working with some of their potential tenants out there in phase 2 of the site, had identified some items in the PUD ordinance that needed to be amended to properly accommodate what those tenants were wanting to do. And so we, in the process of doing that with the Carton Associates folks, we also had identified a couple of other things that we felt like while we're doing it, we might as well address them at the time. And then also the other thing that we've done since the last time this was adopted, is we adopted a new unified development ordinance. And so all of the references to the old ordinance, we decided to go ahead and update those to the new ordinance. So they would be subject to any of the laws and standards that were applied in the new ordinance. And so we went through that and made those changes in terms of the users that we wanted to make some accommodations for. There is and the new ordinance would allow a gas station on this property. And so in addition to both specifically identifying that use, we did also want to write some standards associated with that are slightly different than what in the ordinance to accommodate the specific tenant that they're working with. And so that is in here. The other major change was we essentially eliminated the sign section from the last PUD ordinance, because they actually preferred the language we have in our new unified development ordinance. So they essentially eliminated the specific sign standards that were written in the last PUD, so that they're just going to adhere to the new unified development ordinance sign standard requirements. So those are the two of the more significant changes. The rest of them are really just changes of references to the correct chapters of the new unified development ordinance. So with that, I think that's a quick recap for you, and be happy to answer any questions if there are any.
And is there a size requirement on that filling station? How big it can be?
In terms of the number of pumps, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we have a restriction in the UDO. I believe it's 8, but I think it's also written in here. Let me find that section for you. Yeah, I'll find it here in a second, but the standard that's proposed in here is the same as the standard of our unified development ordinance.
How many stations can be in that area?
Yeah, let me find it for you. Yeah, eight fueling dispensers, which means that there are 2 on each fueling dispenser, 1 on each side. So there would
I
be.
know that. I understood that. How many stations can be in that area?
Oh, one.
Okay. I didn't want a Wally's.
Sorry,
or
I
a
misunderstood the
Buc-ee's or
question. Yeah.
Whatever you call it there.
Well, Wally's is going down on our
Traffic
neighbor to the
issues.
south, so there won't be another one up here.
Right.
Any other questions for me?
I'll have Rob read the ordinance then.
Thank you, Mayor. Council Ordinance 2024-13, again, is an ordinance amending Ordinance 2022-06, the Hickory Junction PUD District Ordinance. Whereas the City of Lebanon is subject to the Unified Development Ordinance, this council adopted Ordinance 2022-06 on March 28, 2022, establishing the Hickory Junction PUD District and associated land use development and design standards. Due to the needs and desires of the potential users, it has become necessary to consider certain amendments to the Hickory Junction PUD District. The City of Lebanon Plan Commission considered petition docket 24-20, requesting an amendment to the PUD District Ordinance with regard to the subject real estate that's described in Exhibit A. The commission forwarded docket 24-20 after a public hearing to this council with a favorable recommendation by a vote of 6-0 in accordance with Indiana law. Secretary of the commission certified the action and forwarded to this council. And this council is subject to certain provisions under Indiana law and therefore finds that Ordinance 2022 is amended as follows, and Mr. Bontrager went through all that out, and we highlighted all those provisions that are attached in Exhibit A, so I won't go through them all, but there are several pages attached to this ordinance.
Thank you, Rob. Any public comment concerning ordinance 2024-13? Okay. Questions, concerns from council? No, sir. I would entertain a motion.
I make a motion, we pass ordinance number 2024-13.
We have motion approved. Is there a second? Second from Rob. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That is approved. Thank you, council. All right, that concludes what I have for new old business. Is there anything from council? Okay, new business then. First item up here is Resolution 2024-19. This is actually just a discussion, but this is concerning our small purchase policy for the city. Kevin?
Thank you very much. We just wanted to have a conversation with you tonight. The resolution is not even in draft form yet, but we wanted to make sure we understood where you might be on this. Under public purchasing law in the state of Indiana, there is a provision for purchases less than $50,000 that a municipality can establish their own purchasing agency and purchasing policies related to those smaller purchases. Once you get from 50,000 to 150,000, that is where you get into required invited quoting scenarios, and then above 150,000 is where you really get into competitive bidding. And we've been complying with all this. This really came about because we've had some small purchases recently that have went through the quoting process, the portalet enclosures, some other work at some of the fire stations that is needed. It really focused us to look at this conversation again and see if we couldn't do something to help streamline some of these smaller purchases. In talking with Tanya and the mayor and Rob, it's not something that we want necessarily complete freedom under $50,000. In fact, the mayor and I had discussed an option whereby, say, from 0 to 25,000, there could be a scenario where we would have to get sign off from the president of the city council, the mayor, and Tanya would also then attest to those decisions before we would be allowed to just purchase something. From 25 to 50, a suggestion was, well, let's at least go out and invite 2 people to quote the project. We were hoping to still have some safeguards, some checks and balances in place, but wanted to bring that before you as a possible suggestion, but we'd like your feedback. We just feel like, particularly for some of these smaller purchases, like a portalet enclosure or a new air handling piece of equipment for a fire station, that if we could streamline some of those smaller purchases and allow us to be more nimble, it'd also take some weight off of us on trying to go out and request those quotes and bring them back to you or back to the Board of Public Works anytime we wanted to make a purchase. Again, provision is in the state code that allows us to do this. Accelerate Indiana Municipalities AIM. Former Indiana Association of Cities and Towns also has a sort of a policy guide and policy recommendations for things like this that would require us to set up the purchasing agency and the purchasing processes and policies and procedures. But again, just wanted to have that conversation tonight, open this up to what your thoughts were so that we could possibly consider putting something like this in place to help us streamline those smaller purchases.
So currently, right on our current state statute, under 50 requires us to seek 3 quotes, correct?
Correct. If we do not have a policy for those small
Right,
purchases.
Okay. So that's because we're under that now. So that's what we have to do now. So anything under 50,000, we have to go out and find 3 quotes to respond.
Exactly. Or at least if we can't, sometimes we can't get 3 quotes, but we have to document that we pursued qualified companies, qualified firms with that type of work to provide quotes for us. We usually don't have a problem getting 3, but there are times when we can't get 3. HVAC quotes for the Oaks on Main project that was at the previous meeting at the Board of Works. We pursued 8 different companies and only got 2 responses. So there's an example. But
Questions, concerns, thoughts? Again, no action tonight, but we just wanted to kind of bring it up and any feedback from you guys.
Yeah, I think the things you laid out early in your presentation make a lot of sense. And I'm for that. So If it comes to
Okay.
a vote, I say go for it.
Okay.
Does 25 feel like a right threshold? You
On the
guys,
25, where you had said Tanya, the mayor,
so we
President.
were thinking sign off from the president and the mayor essentially. Like again, if there was a, I don't say a mower, right? That would qualify or something.
Great example.
Yeah, like we need to go buy a zero turn mower for the park, right? And we could like, hey, Howard's is running a deal and John brings it to me. It's let's say $15,000. We go, hey, John, or I would go to Dick, whoever the president is, and be like, hey, this mower, does it seem in the ballpark?
I'm
Yes,
okay
right?
with that, as long as we've got
Yeah, so it would
those
be
checks
the
and
council would have
balances.
to, president would be like, yeah, I'm okay
We
with it.
would probably put together some forms that would describe what we're planning to purchase, why we would need to purchase that. And that form would need to be signed off by, as we mentioned, the city council president, the mayor, and then those decisions would have to be attested by the clerk treasurer's office. We could also put into there where the money was coming from, things like that, of that nature, so that could then go into the file and we could always go back and track what was done, why it was done, and who signed off on it.
And just to clarify too, it's not actually us being able to go and like, it'd have to be within the budget, right? So it's not like we couldn't just go and spend $50,000 that wasn't accounted for or budgeted. It would just be the actual procurement of that product. So we put $20,000 in the budget to buy a mower. We go find one for $15,000. We can just go, we would then sign up with the president, we go buy it.
This is the way to streamline it so that you don't have to go get all the other quotes or whatever.
Yeah, because right
Just-
now we would have to go out and go to look at, see if Menards price at the mower and look at, we have to find three to compare. Whereas, usually department heads know, hey, this is a really good deal on these types of mowers.
Yeah.
We need to move quickly on it.
Correct. And yes, to clarify, this would not be any way tied to additional appropriations. This is just the ability for department heads and the purchasing agent of the city to work within their allocated budgets. This is not creating any new funding.
It's not professional services, so it's not like it's strictly for equipment, material, things like that.
And this is very common policy a lot of cities have.
As long as we have the funding source identified where it's coming from.
It'd already have to be secured, yeah.
It has
So
to be secured before we go out. to
it's
bid.
strictly the procurement process,
Yeah.
not
You're
the
going to put that
actual
on the forms.
expenditure.
You'll have those
Correct.
forms. It'll show all that.
I would anticipate that, that was some of the recommendations from AIM is that you put together a form and that form would include where you would be allocating money for or where the previous allocations would be so that you would be funding that purchase from that fund.
And sometimes things come up too, right? Where again, there's a unique situation. And frankly, it's a waste of the other competitors' time to bid sometimes, right? Because they know they're not going to match it. And so they don't even respond, but we wasted our time trying to go get it too. That happens sometimes as well too. So. Final thoughts, comments?
Just as long as we follow Indiana code to do it. That's all we have.
Absolutely.
Okay.
What we're doing. Yep.
So I think I've got some clear direction then. If there's no other comments, we will work with Rob to put together the language. I think this will need to be a resolution and possibly an ordinance as well, the way I'm reading the code, but we'll work with you on that.
Thank you, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, next up will be ordinance 2024-14, and also kind of tied also 2024-15, which are concerning our water and wastewater regulated territories. So this is Jeff Jacob from Lebanon Utilities. This is, yes.
Good evening, Mayor. Council, thank you. Again, my name is Jeff Jacob. I'm the attorney for Lebanon Utilities. I would like to, as the mayor mentioned, talk to you about two mirrored ordinances at the same time. I would ask for, if you're so inclined, to consider these separately by vote at some later date. In essence, these ordinances are providing direction to the utility and to other municipalities or utility providers. We're putting a stake in the ground and saying this is what the anticipated potential future growth of the city from an infrastructure standpoint could be for water and wastewater. And really, this is the city declaring what its concept of potential future growth could be at some point out into the future. It is not a requirement. It is not a mandate. It is not an absolute, but it is providing direction to the utility for CIP purposes on what the city's direction would be as to a concept of planning for future growth. Now, you had annexations in front of you this evening, and one of the things that annexations have changed a little bit is incentivizing cities to expand their infrastructure along their borders. This helps, these ordinances from you help that, and it literally allows us to declare this is a concept that we will be the utility providers into these areas into the future. Now, again, not an absolute. We have worked with the mayor and the city on a concept of what this area looks like, and is attached to your ordinance. The the concept is that the area in yellow, the current corporate limits for the city, and the area in blue would be future conceptual water and wastewater planning areas for the city and the utility. In essence, we move to the west to State Road 75, and opposite to the east, County Road 600 east, to the north, 450 north, and to the south, approximately 300 south. Now, Indiana code provides for an expansion of wastewater territories 10 miles beyond your current corporate limits and 4 for water. Many, many years ago, the city passed an ordinance that established a 4-mile boundary at that time beyond its current and expanding corporate limits for wastewater infrastructure. So this is, from a precedent standpoint, we already have something on the books. This new ordinance comes in and cleans that up a bit and refreshes what the city's concept would be in terms of infrastructure growth into the future. Now, so we talked a little bit about what the city has done from a wastewater standpoint. We've got an ordinance on file that has talked about that and given the utility some direction into the future. The opposite part of that is a water standpoint. And as many of you may have heard, we do have had some very, very serious ongoing negotiations and discussions for additional water coming into the city. In fact, there is a water supply agreement that is in its final stages of draft form with Citizens Energy Group and the utility. So that's the impetus behind bringing these new ordinances to you for your consideration. A few things that I want to tell you what this isn't so that people understand. First of all, this is not an annexation. This is not a commitment by the city to annex out to these boundaries in any way, shape, or form. This isn't a mandate for anyone to connect to sewer water in any way, shape, or form. This is not changing someone's tax rate. This is not incorporating them into the city at all. What this is simply signaling is to Lebanon Utilities and to other utility providers in and around the area that this is where we're planning in terms of our territory to expand into the future. Is no more, no less than that. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I do note the difference in the exhibits, if I may. So this carve out here is the 4-mile boundary. That's as far as we could go out for water at this point. So that's the only distinction between the two exhibits. So I'm happy to answer any questions. Ed Baskell is also here this evening. He'll be happy to address any issues.
So Jeff, also just to clarify too, so you said 4-mile boundary. So based on where the city is currently, almost to 500 West, touching 500 West, a couple of points. Theoretically, we could have actually taken this border further, correct?
We could have more than doubled what the territory map shows, but in discussions with you, the city, this was, we thought, an appropriate stake in the ground or bite, if you would.
Question, I guess, is why didn't we go to 47?
At this juncture, we didn't see that as a need at this point. Good question, good thought. That's something that we could certainly do into the future, and would be happy to consider that. But this was from a direction standpoint in terms of looking at cost to provide infrastructure in this area. This was the directive that we worked through, and I should mention comes to you with both resolutions from the utility board were unanimously approved.
So I'll assume then that Whitestown already has their limit already
Yeah,
designated?
so about a year ago, Whitestown published its sewer and water districts as well. And this takes that into account and does not overlap their districts.
What about Thorntown? Have they done anything?
I'm not aware of Thorntown, but I don't believe that there is any territory that's described in those areas that they would have expanded out that far.
We don't know for sure if Thorntown has a bat.
My research was that Thorntown has not expanded out that far. To the extent it has, the ordinance provides that if there's an overlapping issue, that would be carved out and excluded.
Theoretically, Jeff, could these maps be amended by the council or would it have to go back to utility board?
I would hope and intend that they would be,
Yeah, like, so Dick just like brought up, like, hey, why
brought
are we
up,
to 47?
expanding up to 47. Yes, we could bring that back, I would think, potentially at second reading.
Yep.
And amend the map to reflect that, but I would defer to Rob on that. The utility board resolutions are certainly not binding on the city council, so we could certainly amend that to expand up to 47. That does, however, expand the scope of what our sort of our economic or fiscal analysis of what expanding into those areas would look like. Any other questions?
Yeah, maybe a little more explanation of why the utility needs to have this, because I'm thinking about just a person sitting at home, maybe watching this, going and seeing these boundaries going, oh, they're getting ready to do X, Y, and Z, you know?
Yeah,
And-
Mr. Kincaid, great question. This is simply, so a good example would be if the utility was expanding in its current corporate limits along the western edge, let's say, which we'll see a lot of in the coming years, and it was making a determination on whether or not it wanted to put a 6-inch or a 10-inch water main in an area. And the water service territory, it ended and it was sort of stubbed off. It would look at whether or not, and that cost, it costs more to put the larger main in than the smaller main. What we're doing is we're being fair to the utility, to the city, to current ratepayers and others in the area and saying, hey, listen, if we decide to spend the cost to put the larger water main in, we want to know that we can count on that to be an area that we could expand to into the future from an economic standpoint to provide water to those who want it. Again, this is not a mandate for anyone to connect, but it allows us to invest in future infrastructure and know that we'll get a return on that when we expand and oversize, if you will. So it's really, it is simply for planning purposes and signaling to the utility what the city is thinking from an infrastructure standpoint as we look into the future. Again, not a commitment. This can change. I would expect the city council to continually look at this issue from time to time, as well as the utility board and revisit some of these issues. But it allows for the utility for, I know you're dealing with budget issues, but as you look into long range, 5, 10, 15, 20-year budgeting, what to look at from an analysis standpoint.
Let me be hypothetical, Jeff. I know you lawyers usually hate hypotheticals, but theoretically, what if someone, wanted to build a house on 75, right? not in city limits, right? But if this is if this is adopted, maybe within our water territory, call it, right? Could they say, you have to, as a city, deliver us water here, even though they're not, either because they're in the water territory, but not in the city?
No, that would not mandate us to do that. Now, we could provide it to them. There is provisions in our ordinance that talk about moving outside of our corporate limits. And so if we sat down with the city and determined that that was in everyone's best interest, yes, we could do that. That individual would need to pay the cost to run the main out to them. And we would say, listen, instead of a 2-inch water line, we'd prefer a 6-inch line because we expect, because we've gotten feedback from the city that we'll see growth in this area in the future, and you're sort of out of time and out of line. But if you want to write the check to do that, then we'll pay the difference in upsizing it because we know what to expect in the future. And we would support that because we've planned.
Essentially, so that the house next to them that wants to be on water 2 wouldn't have to redig that whole line and install the 4-inch line.
Absolutely correct, Mayor.
Good.
That line doesn't move if the corporate limits change and move farther out, does it?
So the way that the ordinance is drafted, no. The old ordinance did, and it had this expanding boundary. It would be our hope would be to revisit this on a more frequent basis and expand. I mean, there's quite a bit of territory in here. We've got some wastewater planning to do, and then of course seeing water come back into the city. We need to evaluate, but this will allow us to put that stake in the ground. But no, to answer your question, it isn't an incremental growth beyond these areas.
Questions for Jeff?
So,
Okay, Sandra.
So they're not going to be mandated. You're saying that's clear. Nobody has to get on this and do this, correct?
Correct. So Indiana code allows the city to mandate connections within its corporate limits when a user is 175 feet or 300 feet, depending on what you're dealing with, from a utility line. The city has never taken that position and never forced those connections that I'm aware of. So to answer your question, we don't have that control right now outside the corporate limits, number one. Number two, that has never been the policy to force connections. Those are health department issues, and if somebody has a septic issue and they want to connect, then it's available to them.
And do you choose to run the lines in these areas or what have you? So if you, is that, I mean, not you, but I mean, do we run the lines so that what I'm getting to is eminent domain? I don't want to see people losing part of their property because we've decided to go ahead and run a line in a certain place.
No, so these are, and that's another good point that I should clarify. We have no plans to install any sewer or water mains outside the corporate limits of the city of Lebanon into these areas today. So we're not running out and installing lines. That's not what this is about. This is a planned expansion. As the city expands and annexes and grows, we're contemplating that we would build our infrastructure on those ever-changing boundaries, like we're seeing this evening, to accommodate that future growth. And what we're saying is, we want to be able to be the ones to serve that area rather than allow another utility to come in and say, oh no, we're going to take this area and serve it. We're telling the utility board, the utility staff, and other utilities what our plan would be. So no, we don't have any plans to go out and condemn property to service these areas and run lines in that capacity. Now, I do want to tell you so what will, as we look at growth in these areas, being able to plan in advance when you see development happen, that you catch that developer and say, hey, we've master planned this area and we want to see a water main easement go through the south side of your project. Please dedicate that to us so we can provide water to the next developer. You know, it's always been the moniker that development pays for development within the city, and we expect that that would be the case. So as things sort of leapfrog along, that would allow us to plan to obtain easements and plan for utility right-of-way to expand out into those areas. Now, what I don't want to mislead you in suggesting that eminent domain would never be used to acquire easement to run any utility line in these areas. That's
You would
not
have
a
to bring
true.
it back in front of the council.
I'm sorry?
You would have to bring it back in front of the
Absolutely.
council.
Yes. Yeah. Just like we had a situation earlier this year where we had it in
Voted no.
Brennanwood.
And that's what I'm trying to make sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
But again, that's a little bit of a situation because that was an upsize of a line, right? So frankly, it was kind of it should have been bigger initially, right? And that's kind of what this is helping us try to avoid in the future, because we know as we're growing, if we know, hey, we got to get water or wastewater out to these boundaries, it needs to be bigger pipes initially to make sure that we don't have the situation, or make sure the right of way is big enough to accommodate in the future, that we don't have to go back in and get it later.
Absolutely, or a bigger facility to accommodate the growth, or a lift station, or those kinds of things. So while we're speaking of eminent domain, I do want to report to you happily that the last time I was in front of you requesting some eminent domain authority, that those have both been amicably resolved and did not require the filing of a complaint.
Okay, good, good. I'm glad to hear that.
So
Thank you for bringing that back.
Further questions? Any discussion from council of, do these boundaries seem appropriate? I mean, again, we kind of use the center township for the eastern side essentially, and kind of as guidance. Certainly we were west kind of thinking, 75 I thought was kind of a good dividing line, so to speak. Frankly, I didn't think to look further north, to your point, Dick. Certainly we could do that if that's something the council's interested in, but
There's a lot of growth up there, that we're doing, so.
I mean, yeah. You mean,
I just wanted to make sure we didn't already creep over somebody else's line already. So I wanted to make sure that didn't happen.
no, yeah, that was kind of where, I mean, do you want us to take it further north? Does it, I mean,
I was just curious why we didn't go to 47 with us all the way to, 300, say 300 is our top line. That's actually 375, and
yeah.
we only got 3 miles to
Is
47.
it 450, I think is where we stopped it? Because it's the northern edge of Lilly,
Yeah,
right?
450 is where we
yeah,
stopped
450 north, yes.
it. Someday we'll probably be to east over to past 47, maybe someday.
Could we prepare an amendment that we could kind of have a proposed and kind of have, this is the base, and then if we wanted to amend it, we could vote on that other map. Is that possible,
Yeah,
Jeff?
yeah,
You could-
I'll bring both back revised exhibits for
That's like
second
the
reading.
idea of going back and looking at it every 5 years.
Right. Well,
We
and
may have to make a change.
I was going to ask you, you remember the last time we updated our service territories?
Well, I do. Water we've never had a service territory for water. And you've never had a provider that's come in that had the capability to provide the water. And, that's changing a little bit. We're going to have a wholesale provider coming into near or adjacent to the corporate limits. And Mayor, I believe it was 2014 that the wastewater territory there was an ordinance that was adopted by this council. And it actually just said, hey, we're going to look 4 miles outside at that time, much like we've done here instead of the 10. But obviously things have changed pretty considerably since then, and there just hasn't been the need, frankly, to address these issues.
10 years. And I was going to mention earlier, Sandra, you were asking about running out mains and things like that. So it's also currently the policy of the utilities in the city that you have to be within the corporate borders to get new water and wastewater service, right? So using that situation, it's a development coming to us saying, hey, we want to be in the city, and therefore they're willing to dedicate and give us the right of way to extend that. So it avoids those eminent domain discussions you were bringing up.
And that's where incentivizing the expansion to your territories and boundaries makes sense, right? So.
It helps you actually avoid conflict by doing that, by planning it out.
Well, I have said for a number of years that the utilities needs to be planning Center Township. Well, this is taking in Center Township a little bit more to the west, and I understand why we're going a little bit more west. But we're finally taking in Center Township, where you guys can really do some, I said you should have been planning. I don't know how much planning has been done in the past, but now it gives you something to look at in the future. If we go there, we've got something to look at.
I can tell you, I can address that issue, is that there aren't any surprises to the west side of this map and maybe a little bit to the south. What's the change for the utility is and everybody's expansion to the west. And so that's where some additional master planning is going to have to be done in, to and including, in the LEAP district, master planning for that area is being done as we speak. But this will be just more conceptual beyond that area.
Questions or comments at this time? Okay, I'll have Rob read the 2024-14 first, and then if there's a public comment, and then we'll have the next one.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Council Ordinance 2024-14 is an ordinance establishing a water regulated territory for the city of Lebanon. Whereas the city owns and operates through its utility service board, a municipal water utility known as Lebanon Utilities, for the purpose of providing safe, reliable, and efficient water utility services in and around the city pursuant to Indiana law. Indiana law permits the city to exercise the powers related to water utility service granted by Indiana Code in areas within 4 miles outside its corporate boundaries. Whereas the city wishes to establish a regulated territory for the provision and regulation of water utility service that includes areas within its corporate limits and extends up to 4 miles outside of its corporate boundaries as permitted by Indiana law, excluding any customer currently being served by another water utility or within the boundaries of another municipality. That's defined as the water regulated territory. On September 4, 2024, the board adopted, which that's the utility board, adopted Resolution 2024-07, recommending to this council to adopt an ordinance establishing the water regulated territory. Therefore, be it resolved, this council finds and determines that the recitals in this ordinance are made findings and determinations of this council. The city consents to the establishment of a water regulated territory for the purposes of providing regulating the provisions of water utility services within the certain areas inside and outside of the city's corporate boundaries. The water regulated territory is defined and established, again, as those areas within its current and future corporate limits. Generally, the entirety is Center Township, including portions of Jefferson and Washington townships, but no more than 4 miles outside of the city corporate boundaries, and that's depicted on Exhibit A. Upon the adoption of this ordinance and the approval by the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, or the IURC, the city shall have the exclusive authority to provide or regulate water utility service in the water regulated territory. Upon adoption of this ordinance and approval by the IURC, other utilities are prohibited from providing water utility service in the water regulated territory, unless such other utility requests and obtains the permission of the city. This ordinance does not mandate the city extend service to areas where technically or financially are not feasible. It does not prevent the city from authorizing another utility to provide service in the water regulated territory. It does not prevent the use of on-site water systems where the city does not currently have facilities available. No end service user shall permit a connection to water utility service in the water regulated territory provided by any other water utility service provider unless such utility service provider has requested and obtained the permission of the city. If any one or more of these provisions in this ordinance shall be deemed by a court of competent jurisdiction to be contrary to the law, then such provision shall be deemed severable from the remaining terms and shall in no way in affect the validity of other provisions of this ordinance. The city shall pursue any and all necessary approvals for enforcement of this ordinance. Any dispute between the city and any other utility shall be submitted to the IURC for dispute resolution. And this water-regulated territory may be amended by an ordinance amending the water-regulated territory attached as Exhibit A, subject to the approval of the IURC.
Thank you, Rob. Ordinance 2024-14 has been read on first reading. Any further comments, questions from council? Okay. Any public comment? Okay. Thank you, everybody. All right, we'll take that up at our next meeting, which will be September 23rd at 7:15 p.m. All right, next up is ordinance 2024-15. Rob.
Thank you, Mayor. Council Ordinance 2024-15, again, is an ordinance establishing a wastewater regulated territory for the city of Lebanon. So bear with me. It's substantially similar. It's a mouthful. So the city owns and operates, again, through its utility service board. It's defined as the board, municipal wastewater utility known as Lebanon Utilities. Indiana code permits the city to exercise powers related to wastewater utility service granted by Indiana code in areas within 10 miles outside of its corporate boundaries. Whereas the city wishes to establish a regulated territory for the provision and regulation of wastewater utility service in an area that is within 10 miles of its corporate boundaries as permitted by Indiana law, again excluding any customer currently being served by another wastewater utility or within the boundaries of another municipality, and that's defined as wastewater regulated territory. On September 4, 2024, the Utility Board adopted Resolution 2024-08, recommending to this council to adopt an ordinance establishing the wastewater regulated territory. Therefore, be it resolved, again, that the findings and the recitals to this ordinance are made findings and determination by the council. The city hereby consents to the establishment of a wastewater regulated territory. The wastewater regulated territory is defined and established in those areas, again, within its current and future corporate limits in the entirety of Center Township, including portions of Jefferson and Washington Township, but no more than 10 miles outside of the city's corporate boundaries, and that's depicted in Exhibit A. Upon adoption of this ordinance and the approval by the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, or the IURC, the city shall have the exclusive authority to provide or regulate wastewater utility service in the wastewater regulated territory. Upon adoption of this ordinance and the approval of the IURC, other utilities are prohibited from providing wastewater utility service in the wastewater regulated territory, unless such other utility requests and obtains the permission of the city. This ordinance does not mandate the city extend service to areas where technically or financially are not feasible. It does not prevent the city from authorizing another utility to provide service in the wastewater regulated territory. It does not prevent the use of on-site disposal system where the city does not currently have facilities available. No end service users shall permit a connection to wastewater utility service in the wastewater regulated territory provided by another wastewater utility service provider unless such utility service provider has requested and obtained the permission of the city. Again, if any one of these provisions shall be deemed by a court to be contrary to law, then such term provision of this ordinance shall be deemed severable from the remaining terms and shall in no way affect the validity of other provisions of this ordinance. The city shall pursue any and all necessary approvals for implementation of this ordinance. including but not limited to seeking the approval of this ordinance by the IURC. Again, any dispute between the city and any other utility shall be submitted to the IURC. The wastewater regulated territory may be amended by an ordinance amending the wastewater regulated territory map attached in Exhibit A. And this ordinance shall be in full force and effect upon its adoption, and any other ordinance in conflict with provisions of this ordinance, including but not limited to Ordinance 2014-03, is hereby superseded to the extent inconsistent herewith.
Thank you, Rob. Any final questions from council?
One.
Go ahead, Dick.
So the map is the same as the water map? That's the way it appears.
It's a little bit bigger, but
Sir, if you look in the northeast corner, there is a slight cutout that water could not extend out beyond that 4 miles. Wastewater is able to. It is a 10-mile, but we did not extend out beyond. So if you look in the northeast corner,
because that's within Center Township.
That's correct.
That corner there, but it's not within 4 miles.
Yeah, I
We
see
don't
that.
it's
go.
beyond 4 miles.
But it's not extending out 10 miles.
No, that is correct. We are not extending out 10 miles. It is the same except for that carve out with the water. So yes, water did not go out, or excuse me, wastewater did not go out 10 miles, though it could.
Good.
We only went out 4 consistent with water.
Okay.
Make sense?
So essentially, the wastewater is within 4, mirroring the water, except for that tiny little corner that goes out like 4.25, just to
Correct.
just to finish off the rest of Center Township.
So we pass these ordinances and then you take them down to IURC for approval?
Correct, correct. And while the water and wastewater utilities are not regulated, they are, because this is outside of our corporate limits and making sure that everybody plays well together, that's the purpose.
So they don't become established really until the IURC approves them,
Correct.
whatever, and
Correct.
could be weeks to months to months.
But it's certainly value for us to say, hey, this is where we've
No, I don't,
forecasted.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand that.
It-
I just want everybody to understand that we approve it, then it's got to go to IURC for them to approve what we just did.
Correct, correct.
Because, okay.
Why do the documents on the wastewater say 10 miles and the water says 4, but you said that the wastewater's 4, so why does it say 10?
We were simply pointing out and mirroring the statute. And if you'll notice on the one map, we did go out beyond 4 miles on the wastewater. So what I wanted to do is be consistent with Indiana code that wastewater permits us to go out 10 miles. We chose not to. We only extended out 4. So the northeast corner on the
I see
waste,
what you're
you see
saying
that?
there, but-
Okay. That's the reason why we referenced the 10 miles.
Okay.
Is because we went out, we're not planning on 10, but we're simply mirroring what Indiana code would permit.
And this too could change under the next evaluation.
I would expect it to.
Okay. Just want everybody to understand.
Questions or concerns? Okay. Ordinance 2024-15 has been read on second reading. We'll take that up at our next council meeting. Oh, sorry, excuse me, first reading, apologize. First reading, thank you. We'll take that up at our next meeting, which will be September 23rd at 7:15 PM. Okay, that concludes what I have for new business. Anything from council? Okay, any, we entertain a motion concerning the claims? Motion made the claims, or a second?
I'll second.
Second from Sandra, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, claims are approved. Any announcements or discussion? General public comment?
Make a motion, we adjourn?
Motion to adjourn, is there a second? Second from John, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? All right, again, our next city council meeting will be Monday, September 23rd at 7:15 PM. We are adjourned.